Nightmare neighbor's scheme to steal our home ends in $200,000 karma. You won't believe what happened next. Before we begin, let's introduce the key characters. The entitled neighbor will be referred to as and in the future, and the entitled neighbor's spoiled kid will be referred to as S for entitled son. The former owner of our house, known as P.O., will also appear in this story, albeit in a minor role. Also, keep in mind that it's been over 15 years since we acquired the house, so unless otherwise specified, you can assume that most events occurred over a somewhat long period. Let's get started. In order to appropriately build up to the climax and establish the stage for the events that occurred, I must first provide some history. Most of this occurred before we purchased and moved into this home, and owned a huge plot of land down the road from a popular recreational lake in our community. I say down the road, but it's quite a distance away. Even though and lives on the only road that connects many lakefront estates and resorts, as well as the most popular boat dock on this side of the lake, the properties here aren't so expensive that ordinary people can't buy them. However, there are some incredibly valuable properties down the road, and very wealthy people pass by all the time. This will become relevant later in the plot. And, who was fairly affluent and had a considerable amount of property, decided to divide it into 4 nearly equal pieces when her children reached adulthood. One she handed to her daughter, who is surprisingly respectable given the rest of her family. Then she passed another part to S. She built residences for them on both properties, essentially following her children's requirements. Then, on the 4th piece of property, which did not include her own house, she built a little convenience store. This will also be useful later on. I'm not sure why, perhaps to avoid future disagreements, but she ended up giving her children the deeds to their various houses and properties. You probably know where this is headed. While the respectable daughter was pretty respectable, S, or should I say irresponsible son, was a party animal. Everyone in the area at the time despised him. He would host loud, rude, late-night parties practically every night, keeping everyone awake. Because he was called on so frequently, the police must have had someone stationed nearby. It undoubtedly did not help his entitlement that Mommy paid all of his bills for him. She maintained everything in her name, including water, electricity, and rubbish. They all went to her mailbox. Well, except one. Because the property was in his name, so were the property taxes, which he never paid to and instead ignored. I suppose and either didn't think about it or expected he would pay for it himself. In any case, it was not surprising when the police arrived at his residence, but it was when he did not return and the house was auctioned off. At this stage, the house was in disarray. There were holes in the drywall, and the living room floor had a large hole that led down into the garage basement. The kitchen floor and subfloor had to be completely redone, and nearly all of the walls were covered in muck. His recklessness and partying habits essentially rendered the residence unlivable according to the banks. As a result, the only people who could afford it were those willing to pay for it themselves. Enter P.O. P.O. was a house flipper, not one of those large, affluent ones you see on TV, but rather a hobbyist. He retired and flipped properties to stay engaged and active. P.O. would acquire a house like this at an auction for a low price, fix it up, and then resell it. While he worked on it, he would live off the proceeds from the prior property. Typically, by the time he completed mending one and purchasing the next, his profit had almost run out. Any remaining monies would go into an emergency savings fund, which he described as nothing exceptional. Anyway, we were looking for a new apartment, but we couldn't afford anything too pricey. We spotted this place for sale on a website and thought it was great. It was the perfect size, in the ideal area, and even down the road from the lake where we enjoy fishing and boating. So, everything appeared to be ideal in practically every regard. We were a little concerned about the pricing, which had not yet been mentioned on the internet, but it wouldn't hurt to look into it. We drove by to look at it and discovered P.O. working on it. We came in to say hello and inquired about the price. He indicated that he intended to fix it up and sell it, and that his realtor had recently placed it in the website's database to make the process quicker and more efficient when he was ready to sell. Anyway, we sat down and had a lovely conversation with him, just being cordial, and he enjoyed the company. We stated that we would be happy to buy it from him for a reasonable price, given its current state and the effort he had previously put into it. He had it approximately halfway built. We mentioned that we wanted to finish it and make it our lifelong home. He declined, claiming that he had previously received several offers for it and did not feel comfortable selling it to us before it was finished. He suggested we could buy it at full price when he was finished. So, we politely thanked him and left our phone number, asking him to call us if he changed his mind, which he assured us he would. Less than 2 weeks later, we received an unexpected call from him. He claimed that his sister had fallen ill in another state and that he wanted to go see her. He would not have the time or patience to complete the house. He said that the house was not up to code, but if we could find a means to acquire it, he would gladly sell it to us for a fair price. We eagerly agreed and began searching for banks. We had a few connections through a realtor acquaintance who actually helped us find a bank prepared to lend us the money to buy the house, subject to a few restrictions. Essentially, we would have 2 weeks to get the house up to code. Otherwise, they might default on the loan and auction it off. After describing the problem to P.O., he pledged to help as much as possible. He couldn't do any work on the house because he was in such a hurry, but he did explain exactly what we needed to do to get it up to code and fulfill the very minimal criteria. He told us how much time, effort, and money it would require. He even promised to aid us in another way. We took out a loan for twice the amount he asked for the house, and he returned the other half. We utilized that money to restore the house. After all of his hard work, the house was so close to being code compliant that we could have done it ourselves. But just in case, we called in several pals and finished it in half the time. After getting everything up to code, there was still a lot of work to be done. So, we spent several months rebuilding flooring and subflooring, rewiring cables, mending cracks in the walls, and replacing old, unsightly, actually rotting wallpaper that was affixed directly to the wall. You get the idea. We put a lot of work into the place. It was then, at last, time to move into our ideal house. Although it still had certain problems that we would address later on, it was at last time to move in. We weren't even done moving in when and visited to introduce herself, over and over. P.O. had cautioned us about and her entitled attitude as we were working things out in the extremely little time we had, and was first rather friendly, and we had no idea why P.O. cautioned us about her so often. Then, it transpired. She gently and compassionately told us that our house really belonged to her, and that we had 30 days to go. As we were finishing our call, she claimed she felt awful for us since we were duped so severely, but P.O. had no right to sell her house to us at all. You might picture our fear when she told us all of this, as we had heard terrible tales about individuals being duped like that previously. That we had invested all of this time, money, and effort into this dream mansion, and now we were about to lose it just like that, as we fell for some guy's fraud, appalled us. We stated we would speak with P.O. and the bank to have it all worked out, and thanked her for clarifying things for us, and for her friendliness. We thus followed through. The bank confirmed P.O. was the real deed owner when we spoke with them. We spoke with the realtor, who likewise attested to the same thing. P.O. told us they had harassed him continuously over the house, and that they had accused him of stealing the house following his purchase at auction. Every person we spoke with related exactly the same story. We even went up to the courthouse to verify our name was on the deed. We learned its tale from various neighbors during this procedure, not long after this, and asked us when she could expect us to be moved out. We said that legally, we owned the property, thus it would never be possible, and lost the property. We had no bearing on this. We said we knew it was most likely quite difficult to lose her family property like that due to her son's carelessness, but that was not our fault. We were merely living in a property we had purchased with our own hard-earned money and had worked so hard to restore. And then started a protracted sob narrative about how this property had been in her family for generations, how she couldn't bear to lose it, and how P.O. had pilfered it from her while she was caught up in the confusion of her child being detained. Given that we purchased the house from P.O. for roughly $150,000, and considering that he was still making a meager profit on that even after all of the labor and materials he had invested in it before selling it to us, we inquired why they did not bid for the house and buy it back after us lost it. They could have had it back and easily paid next to nothing at auction, and said they refused to pay for something properly theirs and thought the house and belongings were being taken from them. We once more apologized, but we stressed that with all the time, money, and extra supplies we had spent, simply to make her happy, there was no way we could afford to lose the property. We were sympathetic to her circumstances, though, and we offered her the property for a very fair price, $100,000, which, given its location and state of repair, is still more than half of its overall market value. We believed it was a fairly reasonable price after purchasing it from PO for $150,000 and adding another $30,000 for materials, plus several months of hard labor to repair it. Though we said nothing, if she wanted to negotiate with us, we would even be ready to drop to $90,000. She instantly counteroffered with $40,000, stating she shouldn't have to pay anything at all for something rightly hers. She stated that she knew how much work we put into it and that we had to buy a lot of supplies to restore it, so she would be gracious and throw in an extra $10,000 for all the housework we did. That was way too low. She became enraged when we informed her that $150,000 was what we paid PO for the house. She labeled us liars and thieves, claiming the house was a total mess and that it was hardly worth that much. Not only had she turned to name-calling at this time, but she also called our dream house a dump after all the effort, sweat, and tears, not to mention money, that we spent on it. We were done with her lies, so we kindly requested her to leave our house, stating that she was no longer welcome here and that we would never sell our house to her, even if she gave double the market value. Clearly agitated by this, she hurled all kinds of slurs at us as we were showing her the door. Later on, we discovered that she was disseminating all kinds of falsehoods about us around the neighborhood, claiming that we had taken her house, among other dumb behavior. We first dismissed it since we assumed nobody would really believe it. Then, a man drove into our driveway carrying a gun, threatening to force us out. Though we had never personally met him, we had heard of him. Presumably viewing himself as the neighborhood's peacekeeper, he challenged anyone who generated such disturbances, saying he was a decent, reasonable man. Most of the residents in our area really liked him. Being a relatively rural area with lots of not-so-law-abiding residents, most locals valued his presence. Actually, he did far more than the police do most of the time and worked hard to maintain the peace in the area. Just a note, there are two main divisions to our neighborhood. Mostly senior people occupy one portion. It's quite pleasant and quiet, and everyone gets along there. The other is bursting with the less law-abiding folks farther into the bush and away from curious cameras, separated by roughly a mile or so of farmland and woodland. We dwell on the brink of the quiet section. We then decided to try out that theory. After learning about him before, and presuming from descriptions that this was the same man, we welcomed him in for a beverage and conversation. Since we didn't know what was going on, we let him bring his gun, but we advised him that we would be carrying our own as well, if that means anything. Almost everyone in my town owns a gun. There are more gun stores than dollar stores. Hence, we were not really concerned about his carrying a pistol. In our town, that isn't really meaningful. It simply meant we were capable of defending ourselves if this got out of hand. Now, if someone pointed it at you, which he didn't, that would tell another tale. Returning to the main narrative, following a few hours of talking and situational explanation, he said he thought it was something like that and apologized for the misinterpretation, promising it wouldn't happen again. He said he turned off a switch after becoming enthralled by the reports. He also praised us for purchasing the house, saying that everyone was considerably happier when S moved out. He didn't have to hear people grumbling about loud music and intoxicated, high kids staggered along the middle of the road in the middle of the night, almost getting run over. Afterward, we all laughed good-heartedly about it. He departed without saying another thing. Time now for the reason Mr. Peacekeeper felt the rumor might be so readily believed, though it's a bit of a side narrative. This is also a significant turning point, as Anne's things started to fall downhill. Let us now get on to it. The events of this side story do overlap slightly with those of the next section of the plot. I then indicated and divided up a part of her land to open a convenience store. Well, this shop was quite well liked in the area, and being exactly in the middle, it was in a prime location. Their prices were unpopular. They really overpriced everything by quite a little, and their customer service was likewise essentially restricted to a "thank you for your purchase" as you left the door. That was good, I suppose, as occasionally they would offer a refund should you discover mold on the food you purchased from them. Still, they were rather well liked, as they were the only convenience shop in Miles. For most folks, they were simply a skip and a hop away if you had to buy groceries and did not want to drive all the way to town. Heck, we even put aside our differences and visited there quite a bit. After all, they were virtually next door. Apart from that, though, Their modest store's popularity helped them to establish a quite good reputation in our neighborhood. Everybody wanted to keep their handy small store, so they would dare anyone to attempt and remove it from them. I guess I could sort of see the emotion there. And that's back when everyone felt Anne and her family were decent folks. Therefore, people listened when and started disseminating rumors. Everyone knew that was ludicrous. Hence, the stories of us pilfering a whole house from her merely flew over. Still, they mostly believed she was trustworthy. People did believe the other stories, though, and trust me, there were plenty, but most of them were little, insignificant items. Let me explain that even supposing all the allegations about us were accurate, there was far more that could be said about some other people in our neighborhood. Hence, nobody ever gave them any thought, and clearly disagreed with us. Hence, nobody wanted to be on her negative side in case she banned us from her store. They did avoid us. They all simply turned away from us and let her run wild. And let her son return and, after a few years, when he was at last released from jail and had nowhere else to live, she rented him an apartment above her convenience store, since she disliked having him live with her and totally banned any wild parties on her land ever again. Though all he had to do was operate the business for them when they were busy with other things, which wasn't very often, he did not really have to pay rent. Still, and son did not learn his lesson, even with all of this. He would clearly pocket the extra money and routinely double-charge products while running the register. We went back in for a refund after repeated discoveries of this. They usually used the broken register as their justification. After observing a trend, we told and that her son most likely pocketed the money and was double billing people for products, and was fairly entitled, but she did not go so far as to engage in clearly unlawful activity. We loved her small business and wanted nothing to happen to it. Instead of appreciating us for bringing this to her notice, she told us that we were seeing things and gently advised us to screw off. We very respectfully followed her demand. We also forwarded the information to some of our neighborhood buddies. Thanks to Anne, it had taken years to really reach the point where some of them would even glance at us, let alone converse with us. At last, though, we had befriended one another. Every year, Christmas goodies for neighbors helps to cheer someone's day. In any case, they thanked us, even though they informed us they didn't really believe it. Still, the news soon permeated the area. Then, very fast, arrived Mr. Peacekeeper. He stopped in our driveway once more, but this time he was far friendlier. Knowing most of the stories about us were false, he generally disregarded them. Since then, we have really spoken with him several times, mostly on more pleasant terms, not on any major issues. Every now and then, he popped by for a beer and just to talk about events in the area, inquiring of us on a few items. He did this with everyone, talking to most people at least once a year to stay current and ensure everything stayed peaceful and orderly. He made up his mind to do their job better so they wouldn't have to, since he disliked the notion of police lingering about. Everyone, including ourselves, thought this was a great arrangement. It meant you could let your children stroll unaccompanied down to the lake from the worst areas of the neighborhood. Having said that, he really did not enjoy the tales we were distributing about our neighbors, especially regarding their small business. He said he had already spoken with them, and they felt it was a misinterpretation resulting from register problems. He advised us to halt those rumors straight away if we wanted no problems. Although we knew he most likely wouldn't accept it, even if we could show him evidence, we still wanted to show him. Since and waved it off as a register error, there was most likely nothing we could do to persuade him. He truly loved and would usually take her word over ours. We thus agreed and apologized for any problems, stating that we really felt insulted and genuinely wanted to defend the few friends we had acquired in the area. He went without saying much after accepting an apology and issuing one last warning. We thus just listened and decided to cease shopping there unless absolutely necessary. But 2 more years changed everything. Though Mr. Peacekeeper personally went around and told every single person that they were untrue, rumors started by us because of our property dispute with Anne. People actually started paying more attention to their receipts after shopping there and started noticing the same patterns that we had noticed. After we had pointed it out and the rumors got around the neighborhood, and most certainly knew about it, but she opted to do nothing and, rather, try to silence people with stories. And son most likely pocketed enormous sums of money during this period. Small country stores like that, nevertheless, are entirely dependent on their customers who reside in the area they are set up in. While individuals are vacationing and having fun in the sunny months, they generate a significant profit, but not enough to last through the winter. And then that occurred. At last, Mr. Peacekeeper linked the dots, and he was furious, and was right there with him, as we could hear him all the way next door berating and sun to his face. Although you cannot even fathom how fulfilling that was merely the start. Not only did he go off on them, but he also went door to door that same day, letting every single individual in the area know precisely what they were doing, even carrying a stack of receipts with him to show anyone who needed proof. Now, Mr. Peacekeeper was the one in the community who was trusted more than Anne. Literally, in a 24-hour period, he had wrecked their company entirely. Every resident in the area ceased visiting. Vacationers and winter birds who knew nothing helped them still do somewhat well over the summer. But when winter struck and those crowds disappeared, they began to bleed money. 2 winters later, they were obliged to close their store for the winter months. That meant, though, they had to buy it all fresh every spring and discard more than 90% of their inventory every fall. After 3 more years, they finally closed permanently, as, I suppose, their expenses were not very low. That was the time their reputation in the community began to collapse, and owing to that, people started genuinely valuing us more. At last, we were able to establish some friendships without having to exert much additional effort. People stopped neglecting us and treating us as though we were afflicted. Still, and slide from there was only the beginning. I regretfully must include a bit more history to reach the conclusion of the narrative, though this shouldn't take too long, or at least I don't believe so. Sorry that this is beginning to resemble a short book, and seems to be quiet, and I mean quite noisy, not even walking outside without her following our every move through her window, or heading outside to walk her dog, pick up her grass, pull weeds, or whatever excuse she can come up with at the time. She is probably outside as well if we are strolling about our property. We clearly aren't on the best terms with her and don't particularly want someone staring at everything we do, but we have nothing to hide. We truly don't want to be watched when we're attempting to unwind in our swimming suits. We have plans to set up a little pool and hot tub outside back. We, therefore, started researching a privacy fence. Wanting to be good neighbors, we gently told, and that we would be building a fence, to which she vehemently objected. We told her we intended to erect a privacy fence. We still had to live with her, though, so we volunteered to talk with her about the specifics of the fence, the color, form, etc. Given that glancing toward our property seemed to be her preferred pastime, we wanted to make sure she wouldn't have to spend all day, every day staring at something she felt to be an eyesore. After all the nonsense she's put us through, we really still make extra effort to be the greatest neighbors we can. But returning now to the narrative, we intended to install the fence a foot over on our land across the whole property boundary, only to avoid any conflicts, since we wanted to be sure there were no disagreements regarding its placement. This was, by the way, before S left prison. We paid for a copy of the deed with a map of our property lines at the courthouse. To be honest, we were startled to learn she claimed around 1/3 of our land. She even had a garden on it and a small hut. You see, our property runs over a line of trees. It is more of a half-hexagon or trapezoid-like form than a straight-box property. As you find in several states where I reside, weird property lines are really typical. Anyways, the deed and property map indicates that a little triangle segment forms out of a line of trees, cutting across some of our property. The trees that give it the impression of a square. She was asserting her ownership on the other side of the trees. She entirely flipped out once we brought this up to her, calling us liars and thieves and all kinds of other things. Having lived here for years believing it to be rightfully hers, we paid relatively little attention to the land. We thus offered to sell it to her, or, perhaps, trade it for a piece of her property so that everyone would have things simpler. She owned some land that connected to ours that was somewhat difficult to maintain. Expanding it a small distance would greatly simplify matters. Not to mention, it would allow us more space to pursue our interests, saying that she would never pay for anything that already belonged to her, and that she wouldn't even consider giving us her property for nothing, especially following our supposed theft of this property from her. She categorically rejected. We have been in a major, continuous property conflict since then. Now, something about where I live. As I indicated before, it's a pretty rural location with many unusual property lines, and property lines are rather often not straightforward. Many of the documents are hundreds of years old, and instead of X feet in Y direction, they employ transient markers like large oak tree to large rock next to stream. Many of these sites could be describing several things or might have vanished over a century ago. Therefore, it would be quite understated to claim that there are many property conflicts in our neighborhood. That, together with the fact that in some cases a very little fraction of property might be worth a lot of money, has caused our state to draft a lot of quite rigorous laws and rules controlling property conflicts, surveyors, etc. As a side note, a few years ago, a landowner prevailed in a property battle against a very huge firm over just 0.1 acres of land that paid the man over $1 million and harmed the company. Returning to the subject, given and developed our property lines rather lately, they were rather straightforward. That does not change the fact, though, that property rules are rather rigorous, especially with relation to surveyors. Like in the previous example, a surveyor might be readily bought by a big company facing the loss of millions of dollars over a small piece of land. How, then, should one ensure fairness to the appropriate proprietor? Well, you create it such that the person who bought or coerced the surveyor has everything to lose by lying, as well as the surveyor. According to our state statutes, a surveyor, even with honest error, who provides a poor survey by even a few feet, would not only be fined heavily, but also lose their license and never be allowed to survey once more in the state. In addition, they have to tell and reimburse every one of their customers for up to 10 years prior to the incident. The clients can then choose to pay for a further survey by a non-affiliated surveyor at the expense of the original surveyor. That is, every client up to 10 years before the occurrence, and currently as well. Should they instead be discovered to be accepting a bribe or blackmail, then all damages and extra charges go toward the one who paid the bribe or extortion. This, together with the time and money lost from visiting courts and the general inconvenience caused to them, makes surveyors in my region especially likely to aggressively avoid anything even resembling a property dispute. Therefore, when a conflict arose, you might picture it not as simple as phoning a surveyor down here. It was also an unanticipated outlay of money. She found someone before we could locate someone, and, I suppose, she bought them or something, since they presented the property line precisely as she had described, except for one small detail she objected to. She probably omitted mentioning that to them. Our land allegedly runs roughly 1 foot from her house. Oh, that was interesting to fool about with, but that was nowhere like the property she is actually trying to pilfer from us right now. She always seems to be indifferent, introducing herself to a surveyor whenever we are able to locate one, and noting that she previously had her piece of the land measured, therefore hinting subtly that there might be a property conflict involved. After outlining what it could mean for anyone who would be interested in surveying our land, this quickly scares off everyone. You are clearly aware of why. Oh, did I overlook mentioning that the landmarks from the bank surveyor conveniently vanished before we ever started living on it? Not at all. Indeed, they did. Somehow, I question how that came about. I suppose we will never know. Either way, if we can even locate someone ready to employ a surveyor, and everyone we have thus far found has given us completely ludicrous rates for it would most likely cost us as much as that piece of property is worth. Though we are now saving cash to try to recruit someone, they are risking their whole livelihood here. That gets us to the culmination of this narrative a few months ago. Although I apologize for the lengthy background, let us now focus on the current scenario, since we are totally engrossed in it. A few months ago, a quite severe storm knocked down a tree in the contested area. Since this tree was literally right next to the road, when it fell, it damaged some of our other neighbors' property belonging to our neighbors across the street from us. Not only that, but it also totaled someone's brand new sports automobile as they were traveling down the road. Although no one was injured, overall, the cleanup took several days, just enough time for us to get a bill in the mail for almost $100,000, practically more than our house and property were worth once we cleaned it up. Negative compliance started to take hold. Thus, just a little extra background for everyone who might not know. Most property or home insurance does not cover damages to other people's property. Usually, it's on you, even if someone is on public property like a road. If your property damages theirs, and you could have reasonably stopped it, For instance, by chopping down a tree next to the road before it collapsed in a big storm, then you're 100% liable for the harm done. At least, that's how it operates where I live. We contacted them when we received the bill in the mail from some unidentified rich person's insurance company regarding their destroyed sports car, and very politely informed them that the fallen tree was not on our property. They claimed they would look into it and come back to us after posing a few questions. About a week later, we got another letter from the insurance company containing a copy of the deed and property line printout, with the tree in question circled in red, obviously on our property. They would be bringing us before court, or they were expecting complete payment within 30 days of their first warning. Give or take, that was roughly 2 weeks from then. We phoned them one more time to, once more, clarify that it was not on our property. The agent first argued with us a little, explaining in much nicer terms than I would have used, that someone would have to be brain dead to believe that the tree in question was not on our property, and that it would be absolutely impossible for anyone to believe it was as far off as the printout showed. All we did was provide them with the phone number of the surveyor and had hired. They groaned, stating they would call the surveyor and look into the situation further, but underlined we had roughly 2 weeks to get the cash ready should what we were stating not be verified. Actually, we never heard from them once more. Recall the penalties I discussed for providing erroneous survey responses? The surveyor acknowledged receiving a bribe, but there was no way and paid him enough to offset all of his potential losses at this time. He would most likely have to leave the country. So, he was not going to be able to provide the insurance company anything different from what he gave us or Anne. Later on, we phoned the insurance company to inquire about the matter. Reading over the notes, the agent felt really content. Confidentiality concerns prevented them from telling us too much, but they could tell us that and clearly disagreed with the claim exactly as we did, stating the land did not belong to her, and that the surveyor validated the findings with them. There was no justification whatsoever for the insurance company to suspect the survey results were fake because we were not contesting them, and the surveyor was hired by and herself. As long as we were not contesting the findings, and should have full responsibility for all damage the falling tree caused. Still, they were limited to saying that. That satisfied us. It was roughly what we expected. The aftermath, though, they clearly were not thrilled about it, but had no major trouble paying the insurance company the money. As you can most likely understand, given my background. Although we are unsure of their wealth or savings, it seems sufficient to cover it without having to sell any more of their property. We have mainly kept quiet about the property conflict since then, but we are still thinking about saving money to pay a surveyor to reclaim our land. By now, the focus is more on the matter's principle than on the actual land. Regarding and, though, we can tell every time she looks at us now that she clearly is not happy with us. She seems to object to the fact that we let her possess our land, for some unidentified reason. It's free land. How could you be dissatisfied with that? LOL. She could try to spread stories about us at this time, but it would most likely backfire, since most of our neighborhood has befriended us and nobody trusts and anymore, and is essentially caught between a rock and a hard place ever since they discovered S was practically stealing from everyone in the neighborhood, right beneath their noses, and knew about it, and did nothing to stop it. We are merely observing the flames they set burn to the ground from back here, anticipating what comes next. Oh, this is just a little extra for everyone seeking a little more enjoyment. We opted to install an invisible dog fence for our dogs while we were considering a privacy fence. For those not familiar with what that is, you bury a little electrical line under the ground, and then fasten a unique collar around the dog's neck. Should they approach too closely, it will set off a beep the dogs truly dislike. Should they continue, the dogs will receive a somewhat modest shock. We had to be convinced initially, as we do not believe in shock collars. One of us even held it and crossed the line. Though it was something you could feel, it did not truly hurt, just left you a little tingly. In any case, you should train the dogs to the beep before letting them run free, so, ideally, they would never even experience shock in the first place. They would turn around after only hearing the buzzer. At the time, we could not afford a real privacy fence, yet we attempted to let our dogs wander about our yard and avoid being imprisoned in the house all day. We wanted to stop our dogs straying anywhere near N's land. Hence, we had it firmly within our own. It wasn't very long either, though it was more than 5 feet past what she claimed to be the property line, and she must have thought we were indicating where we planned to place our privacy fence or something and ran over it with her lawnmower. That day, we all discovered that electrified cables do not work very nicely with electric lawnmowers. Her mower was badly wrecked. Every electrical component was destroyed. She merely wanted to be petty and run over our marks, so she had to buy a whole new mower. The best thing about it was, she had no means of trying to attribute it to us, since it was so far over the property boundary. She clearly tried to disseminate her rumors, but they seldom went very far. Blaming us would have been rather foolish. She never even begged us to get her a new mower or anything. I suppose she knew our reaction if she did. Still, I hope you guys love the narrative. Another one concerns a different scenario. How my mother's malicious compliance cost her firm over $100 million and resulted in the total permanent shutdown of her entire department. It's late, though, and I'm heading to bed. I will relate that tomorrow or something else. Be alert for it. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. Hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.